Hello again, everyone. This is John Einreinhofer. I'm your host for everything West Virginia University Mountaineer on the Grueling Truth Sports Network and the gruelingtruth.net. In this podcast, we're going to give you a preview of the Mountaineers' first game of the 2017 season against hated rival, the Virginia Tech Hokies. The game will be played at a neutral site in Landover, Maryland, where Washington plays in the NFL. The podcast is brought to you by my law offices, the law offices of John Einreinhofer, handling personal injury cases, employment cases, and insurance cases in West Virginia, New Jersey, and Ohio. Find us on www.johnelaw.com. That's JOHNE law.com. Mountaineers coming off a better than expected, by most preseason predictions, of course, 2016 season when they went 10-3, only dropping conference games to Oklahoma State and Oklahoma, and then dropping their bowl game to Miami in a somewhat disappointing performance to close out the season. AP has the Mountaineers ranked at number 22 going into the season. They've got Virginia Tech at 10-4 last year at number 21. In the coaches poll, the spots are reversed, where the Mountaineers are ahead of the Hokies, ranked number 20 in the coaches poll, and Virginia Tech at number 22. Virginia Tech came off a 2016 season where they were very successful under new head coach Justin Fuente, who has proved to be something of an offensive guru so far, did a tremendous job with Memphis turning that program around. The Hokies lost to eventual national champion Clemson in the ACC title game. Virginia Tech has a lot of returners, especially on defense. Going to consider really to have possibly one of the top defenses in the country this year. That'll be a challenge for the Mountaineers. Both teams are going to debut new starters at quarterback. Josh Jackson for Virginia Tech, who doesn't have any experience, and the Mountaineers will have highly touted high school prospect Will Greer, who was 6-0 as a starter for Florida before testing positive performance-enhancing drugs, getting suspended, and then ultimately transferring to West Virginia, where he sat out last season. Since this is the opening game of the season, and no matter what the situation, there is always somewhat of a mystique to the opening game of the season, where no matter how much you follow college football, you try to project, but you don't know exactly what you're going to get. Coaches don't even know exactly what they're going to get, never mind prognosticators. But that just makes things more interesting. So what I'm going to be kind of doing here is, as I preview the Virginia Tech game, going to also be taking a look at the outlook for the Mountaineers for the 2017 season, because the mystery is still there, as this is the opener for both teams, Virginia Tech and West Virginia. Starting out, of course, quarterback being the most important position on the field, Will Greer really being highly touted, frankly, by West Virginia head coach Dana Holgorsen, who says that Greer is everything that he has been touted to be so far. He seems to like everything that he's seeing from him. I know that the Mountaineer fan base has been extremely optimistic about Greer, really treating him as almost kind of a savior. I'm taking a little bit more of a cautious approach so far. From what I've seen of him, I think he looks good, but despite the fact he was one of the most highly touted high school quarterbacks coming out of the state of North Carolina, and of course started for an SEC team, Florida as a freshman, and was 6-0, which obviously That's somewhat impressive right there. He certainly looks pretty good to me. What I saw of him in the spring, but he doesn't yet jump out in the eye test to me that he's a sure thing. I'm certainly not down on him, but I'm taking a little bit more of a cautious approach. That's one thing that's interesting, that he's going to face a good defense in that opener against Virginia Tech, Sunday night nationally televised game at ABC. So that'll be a good test for Will Grier right off the bat. What I really like about the Mountaineers, and I think that is actually being underestimated nationally, is not necessarily Will Grier. Like I said, Will Grier to me seems to be more touted in Mountaineer circles and by the Mountaineer coaching staff than he is by the national college football experts. Doesn't mean that they're necessarily right, but you don't see them touting him that highly. You look at an expert like Phil Steele. He was not that high in the Mountaineers this year, not ranking them in his preseason predictions. But I think what the prognosticators are missing is that I think the Mountaineers have some top offensive players potentially that I think will break out that are a little bit under the radar. For me, it starts with David Sills at wide receiver. I liked him a lot when Coach Holgerson and the staff had the foresight to move him from quarterback to receiver after he was a highly touted high school quarterback but didn't pan out. Had a couple of big games for the Mountaineers a little while back before he decided it was his dream to take one more shot at quarterback. Went out to a junior college, was not overly successful, and Coach Holgerson invited him back to play receiver. He's back. I think he has tremendous potential. I think he's starting to get on the radar just a little bit as the season approaches, as there was a profile of him in Sports Illustrated recently. But to me, Sills is a guy that has, because of the path he took to get to where he is going into this season, he is basically under the radar nationally, so he hasn't been accounted for. I look at another guy like Kennedy McCoy, who looked very good at running back for the Mountaineers, but the Mountaineers are loaded in the backfield. They're also talking about McCoy playing some receiver. I think that could be very successful. He's got some good size even for that. He's not really a little guy. He's 6 feet tall. And you could see him being successful in a multitude of roles. I think he might be another guy that is a little bit under the radar nationally. Then you've got Justin Crawford, who is starting to gain some respect, but for how good he was for the Mountaineers last year, might not even be gaining enough respect. You've got him in the backfield. I think that he is really poised for a huge year. And you got Martell Pettaway, a guy that looked great in a game. They had to take the red shirt off him against Iowa State last year. He's definitely going to play a role. And the Mountaineers even have two other backs who have been impressive. Tevin Bush being one of them, and the other being Alex Sinkfield. These are deep sleepers under the radar. Then you've got solid performers back like Karan White at wide receiver, Gary Jennings. And it's really going to be interesting to see right off the bat how this group of skill position players stacks up against this tough Virginia Tech defense. Coaching-wise, I like the Mountaineers situation right now as well. Dana Holgerson had to coach his way to a coaching extension. He did so. I don't think he's going to take his foot off the gas pedal, though. I think he's competitive enough, and he's in the big-time world of college football. I think he's an ambitious guy. I don't think he's going to get complacent. So I think he will continue to move the Mountaineer program forward. Holgerson has given up play calling duties this year. Jake Spavital comes from Cal. He'll take over the play calling duties. And the Mountaineers have Tony Gibson at defensive coordinator. He's a West Virginia native. Of course, he's understandably a favorite of Mountaineer fans, but he has also developed a reputation nationally. Now, you do see some of the national prognosticators who are considering Tony Gibson to now be the best assistant coach in the Big 12 and one of the best assistant coaches in the country, the Mountaineers defensive coordinator. He has done a great job with that defense. Does not have that many people returning this year, but I think he's proven he will find a way to get the job done with what he has. Mountaineers, actually, the spread has opened up a little bigger in favor of Virginia Tech. Now 5.5. They're a 5-point favorite now over the Mountaineers. The over/under on the game is 52 points. Well, in this opener, I like the Mountaineers. This will be one of their toughest tests of the season, even though this is a game outside of the Big 12. Playing an old rival for the first time since 2005. I love that kind of a game. I don't like the type of game you got in a couple of weeks. You're playing Delaware State, and people say everybody's got a game like that, but I think we're past the point where Power 5 schools should be playing FCS teams. I'm not even crazy at this point when you're playing some of these group of 5 teams like the Mountaineers have East Carolina in their second game of the season. But getting back to that first game, why I like West Virginia in this opener is, like I said, I think Greer will be solid. I actually don't necessarily think he might be as spectacular as some people think, but I don't think he'll be bad either. I think he'll be solid, and he does have more experience since he's got the 6 starts at Florida compared to Jackson of Virginia Tech, who's going to be making his first collegiate start ever. But I think Greer, again, with some of those, the Mountaineers' backfield is getting on the radar screen, but I think that the receiving core and Sills are not necessarily on the radar screen, and I think look for Kennedy McCoy to make some versatile contributions, and Martell Pettaway is a back I like a lot, and Justin Crawford's already proven what he can do. I think the Mountaineers have enough offensive weapons that I think they'll be able to move the ball enough against this Virginia Tech defense. Defenses, to me, even in this era, have a chance at least to be a little more ahead than they normally would be in the first game of the season compared to the offenses. But you certainly don't see that like you used to with all the rule changes, targeting calls, things like that. You don't see the defenses being quite as ahead early as you used to, and you could see some of those scores from the opening action already reflect that. I think people that have not ranked the Mountaineers higher are merely looking at the traditional measuring stick of how many players do they have returning. Experience has always meant a lot in football, as it has in all things in life, and it still does, of course, to a degree. But I think where things have changed is that with the professionalization of youth sports, the Mountaineers have also had a lot of junior college players come in recent years. Holgerson has utilized the junior colleges a lot, and he's had some success doing it. Players just are not as inexperienced as they used to be when they're young players in a program, as was the case, 20, 30 years ago. So I think a lot of people use that traditional measuring stick about who's returning, and of course you still look at it, but it may be too easy of a measuring stick, and they use that too often. I think that's one thing people might be underestimating a little bit about the Mountaineers. The second thing that I think, as we look then towards the Mountaineers season forecast, that I think people might be underestimating, and as someone who follows the Mountaineers regularly, I almost hate to say this, but I am not still sold that the Big 12 is going to be that much improved this year. Last year, Overall, the Big 12 being a little bit weaker allowed the Mountaineers to surprise, and I think Dana Holgerson's program at the same time has taken some steps forward. I think it's going to continue to go that way, and I'm not just saying that about the results of the opening weekend with Baylor struggling against Liberty and Texas dropping one to Maryland at home. Prognosticators had these teams ahead of the Mountaineers. That's one of the reasons they haven't ranked them higher, is that they've just got so many teams ranked ahead of them in the Big 12 that the logic has to be for people that handicap things that way. How good can we expect the Mountaineers to be if we've got teams picked ahead of them in the Big 12 like Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, TCU, Baylor, Kansas State, Texas? I don't see that. I don't think that the Big 12 is going to be quite as improved as people think. There are good reasons for everybody to think that Oklahoma State is going to be very strong, and Oklahoma. But the Mountaineers have Oklahoma State at home this season. I think the Mountaineers have always been very, very tough in Morgantown, even during their time in the Big 12. Of course, that was not the case last year when they played Oklahoma in the snowstorm at home, and they got run out of the building in the first half. But still, the Mountaineers very tough at home. They do have Oklahoma State at home. But that's jumping ahead a little bit. Let's look. Let's look at it game by game. Very, very hard to just pick the results of individual games, never mind a season. But that's part of what you've got to do, and you've got to learn how to handicap things correctly and look at the right signs and make the call. Second game, East Carolina, the Mountaineers have at home. Again, a group of 5 team, they should be in good shape there. Game 3, you've got Delaware State. That's also at home, good shape there. You play Kansas on September 23rd on the road. Kansas's program is still struggling. They haven't been back yet. No reason to think that they would be all the way back this year. So the Mountaineers, again, I think they get by the opener on national TV Sunday night against Virginia Tech. 3 very, very winnable games right after that. Could put you right at 4-0. October 7th, they're at TCU, a big game because it's on the road, and Gary Patterson's a good coach, and a lot of people are feeling very good about TCU this season. But as good as some people are feeling about them, they're not ranked in the AP poll or the coaches poll. I've looked at things such as Phil Steele's, who I do respect his information, and they have TCU ahead of the Mountaineers, but they're not ahead of the Mountaineers in the 2 big polls. So it's on the road, but I think that's a game that the Mountaineers can win. Then you've got homecoming, Texas Tech at home. Texas Tech, of course, Mahomes is gone. That program's had some struggles in recent years. Patrick Mahomes, their quarterback, a first-round pick of the Kansas City Chiefs. Certainly Texas Tech at home. You would think that that's a game the Mountaineers can win. Then Baylor. Again, some people, such as Phil Steele, had them ahead of the Mountaineers in conference preseason predictions. Not ranked in either of the 2 major polls, and as I am doing the podcast, Baylor is trailing Liberty late in the 4th quarter. The game's still on the line, but looking at least, it's only week 1, but looking at Texas and Baylor so far for the theory of the improved Big 12 overall. Then Oklahoma State, they had a blowout win over Tulsa to open their season. They're ranked 10th in the AP in the preseason, 11th in the coaches, and they handled the Mountaineers last year. That and Oklahoma, you would think, will be the Mountaineers' toughest tests of the season. But the Mountaineers have them at home. When they were ranked a few years back and the Mountaineers didn't have one of their best teams, the Mountaineers knocked them off at home. Of course, that's only one instance, but I think the fact that the Mountaineers have Oklahoma State at home gives them a good chance of knocking off the Cowboys. Then they've got Iowa State the next week. Iowa State's program has struggled. They've got Iowa State at home. Then Kansas State, preseason 20 in the AP, 19th in the coaches, blew out Central Arkansas in a mismatch in the opener. Bill Snyder, a great coach. There's just absolutely no doubt about that. He's done wonders with Kansas State, of course, since he's been there and since he came back. He's 77 years old. He's had some health problems. His son's on the staff. Kansas State's got a lot of people back. That is really the rationale for Kansas State being a preseason top 20 team to me. And, of course, there is some logic there. But Kansas State has not been able to put particularly good offensive teams out on the field in recent years. I'm not going to look at the Central Arkansas result as any kind of a meaningful barometer. Mountaineers, of course, it'll be on the road in Manhattan. That'll make it tougher, but I think it will be a winnable game for them. The next week they've got Texas. It's at home. Texas, new coach this year, Tom Herman. Didn't get off to a good start against Maryland at home. And, in Morgantown, not a bad situation for the Mountaineers. The Mountaineers' regular season finale at Oklahoma. The Mountaineers were already being blown out when they had a better second half against Oklahoma last year, and that was at home in the snow. Maybe some conditions you thought would have gone their way, but it didn't go their way at all right from the beginning of that game, although Justin Crawford ended up having a huge game, and he is back. But Oklahoma, 7 in the AP in the preseason rankings, 8 in the coaches. Oklahoma took care of the business in their opener with a 56-7 win over the Group of 5 Conference USA UTEP program. We can't tell a lot from that, of course, but Oklahoma, the Big 12 favorite, of course, had a bowl win against Auburn last year. Oklahoma got off to a slow start last year, then finished strong. Mountaineers have not been doing well as of late against ranked foes coming into the 2017 season. But again, I think the program is on the rise. I think if you look at all the Mountaineer athletic programs, they're all on the rise. I think there is a general tide rising in Morgantown with the athletic programs. I think Shane Lyons has done a nice job picking up where Oliver Luck has left off as the athletic director. I think he's had a very steady hand at the helm, and he's quietly done an excellent job since he's been in Morgantown. He's another West Virginia native. Now, of course, the ultimate prognosticator, if you do any gambling or not, but because they're the people who have to know, is the odds makers in Las Vegas, and they've only set the over-under for the Mountaineers' wins for the season at 7. So Las Vegas is leading the general consensus that the Mountaineers are going to take a little step back this year from where they were last year, because I think the general wisdom is that they don't have that many players returning, and that the Big 12 is going to be tougher in 2017 than it was in 2016. My own thoughts, and not saying it as someone who follows the Mountaineers, but saying it because I really believe it. I do not believe in doing the homer thing on the predictions. I just think that the factors for me that are where the Mountaineers are going to be a surprise is the fact that I think they've got a lot of under-the-radar players, where the fact that they don't have as many returners as some of the other teams that they're competing with in the conference do is not going to be as big a factor as people think. And the second big factor, I think, is that I do not think that the Big 12, and this may be a problem for the Mountaineers down the line, the conference not gaining the respect, but this season it will provide an opening for them. I do not think that the Big 12 is going to be quite as improved as people think. Now, remember also that, of course, the Big 12 reinstates their championship game this year. So if the Mountaineers can get through the conference season, which I think is possible, with only a conference loss to, say, Oklahoma on the road, or maybe Oklahoma State at home, and then if they upset Oklahoma on the road, they're going to be looking at a potential Big 12 championship game appearance. The Big 12 is not going to do it by divisions. They're just going to do it by the top two teams in the conference. So what I'm saying is I think the Mountaineers do have a shot at being at least that second team in the Big 12, which will get them an appearance in the reinstated Big 12 championship game. And I think then, by definition, of course, that gives them a shot at winning the Big 12. So I think the Mountaineers have a dark horse shot at competing for the Big 12 title this year, despite the fact that Oklahoma and Oklahoma State are projected to be tough, and they should be tough. But I think that the Mountaineers will be better than the rest of the conference, and I think that Oklahoma State at home will be a possibility to pull an upset. But of course, we're projecting well down the road. It's very hard to predict the results of single games and how they're going to play out, never mind seasons, no matter how much you know. It's very difficult. That's what makes sports and life interesting a lot of times. But it all starts on Sunday night with the Mountaineers on national TV on ABC against Virginia Tech. First meeting between the two teams since October 1st of 2005. That was a Virginia Tech win, 34-17. The Mountaineers lead the series, but the Hokies have had the advantage in the more recent games that have been played between the two schools. But it's great to see a regional rival return to the schedule. And the Mountaineers do have that down the road. They have Penn State they're going to be picking back up, Pitt. So it's good to see some of these traditional rivals return to the schedule, even though the Mountaineers are in the Big 12, making the non-conference part of the schedule much more interesting. Again, players to watch for me, for the Mountaineers, David Sills, that wide receiver. I like him a lot. I think he's going to get on the radar screen in a big way very quickly. Looked great in the spring game. He's looked great whenever he's played wide receiver for the Mountaineers. Coach Holgerson now saying he has NFL potential, and I think that that's a very accurate statement. I like the fact that they're going to be doing some different things with Kennedy McCoy. Justin Crawford's a very good back. Martell Pettaway's a very good back. The Mountaineers have some other solid wide receivers. And Will Greer, if he can live up to the high expectations, that could really make the Mountaineers explosive. But I think that he's good enough that I think he'll be solid at the least. So I think that the Mountaineers have some offensive potential. And you've got Tony Gibson, who has done great jobs with Mountaineer defenses, especially in the perspective of defenses in the Big 12, where the offense is off the charts, and just merely slowing up the opponents can often be a great defensive effort. Tony Gibson is a coach that's shown he can put together defenses that can do that, and the defense should improve as the year goes along, as some of the newer guys that Tony Gibson has get into the flow. So get by Virginia Tech. Mountaineers have East Carolina, Delaware State, Kansas before they get into the Big 12 schedule. Well, they'll have one game into the Big 12 schedule, Kansas, but before they get into tougher games of the Big 12 schedule being at TCU. I think that the Mountaineers will get off to a good start, get by that Virginia Tech game, and they're going to have a surprisingly good season. which would mean they will be moving up in the rankings, I believe, from the 22 spot in the AP and the 20 spot they are in the coaches poll, and I think that they can make a run at that Big 12 title game. This is John Einreinhofer for the Grueling Truth Sports Network, thegruelingtruth.net. Thanks for joining me on this podcast. I'll continue to bring you all things West Virginia Mountaineers on the Grueling Truth Sports Network, and the podcast was sponsored by my law offices, the law offices of John Einreinhofer, personal injury, employment, and insurance in West Virginia, New Jersey, and Ohio, johnelaw.com. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you the next time that you want to check out Mountaineer sports news on thegruelingtruth.net. Also, come join me and check me out on Inside Boxing Weekly with Jeremiah Pricer and Mike Goodpaster. We do that show every week on thegruelingtruth.net.